明天就是我们8月 Premium 课程上架的那一天。那这个月的主题就是声音。当然声音里面其中一个很有趣的话题就是 accent。那今天要来重新介绍一个让每个人听起来更有说服力的腔调。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Back in episode 92, we introduced an interesting accent to help you work on your pronunciation. Today, we want to revisit that accent because we find that it creates a very interesting way for people to overcome pronunciation lessons.
Exactly. 不敢相信那一集已经是100集之前的事情了，而且其实推出那一集之后，很多人都觉得这个 accent 非常的有趣。那大家也说他希望能够多听到一些练习，所以我们决定呢，把这个所谓的 Mid-Atlantic accent 我们把它放进去，不止放进去我们 Premium 课程，那在今天的 Podcast 当中也要来再仔细的讲一下这个 accent 它的好处在哪里，还有它的特色在哪里。
Before we get into it, we want to give a shout out and thanks to our intern, Julia, who put together the outline for this podcast. She did a lot of deep diving, looking into the technical aspects of today's accent, known as the Mid-Atlantic or Transatlantic accent. To set the tone, we'll give you a little bit of history of where this comes from. Now, this is not an accent you commonly hear these days, outside of very specific instances. But if you've ever enjoyed movies from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, this is a very common accent that you will catch across the golden era of Hollywood. The Mid-Atlantic or Transatlantic accent is often credited as an interesting mix between British English and American English. But primarily it was used in movies because it was considered to be a very sophisticated, posh accent, and also served as an accent that was easily picked up by microphones or other devices at the time.
之前我们就有讲过嘛，其实这个口音这个腔调呢 Mid-Atlantic or Transatlantic accent 它的由来是因为当初好莱坞电影那当时的一些录音啊录影设备当然没有现在一样，所以我们演员呢就非常需要一个很清楚的发音的方式，那再加上呢通常比较偏英国发音都会让人感觉比较高级的感觉，所以当时有很多的教练啊就会来训练演员有这个 Mid-Atlantic accent.
Now, there are actually a lot of YouTube videos out there talking about the history of Hollywood and the Mid-Atlantic accent. But actually, for a very long time, this is considered the proper standard high-class accent of the East Coast. In fact, there are 2 famous books written about this type of accent. One is called Good American Speech by Margaret McLean, written in 1928, covering a lot of the dictation, the proper phonetic sounds. But this accent is actually made most famous by a book written in 1942 called Speak with Distinction by Edith Skinner. And a lot of your Hollywood accents are based on this work. Now, you don't need to get very deep into the phonetic and technical. That's just out there for, the nerds like us who really want to get into it. But these are both the standard books that are used in something called an elocution class or by a diction coach, most often used in the early 30s through 40s for people who want to sound more sophisticated.
Right， 所以刚刚Nick 讲到那个字 elocution E-L-O-C-U-T-I-O-N 它的中文意思就是演说术或者是朗诵法，所以你就可以想象可能当时啊在必须要上台的之前啊，他可能是必须要演说要上台要演习，那他之前都必须得参加这种 elocution courses.
Let's jump into what does the mid-Atlantic accent sound like and why is it such a great thing to practice in order to work on your own English accent and English pronunciation. Why we particularly like this accent is because of what we call the oral seat. In English and in Chinese, how you pronounce your letters, your words, or how you use your breath to make different sounds varies across these two languages. Well, one thing that the mid-Atlantic accent does is it forces your oral seat to be on specific sounds and terms that you don't often face within Mandarin Chinese. For example, how you deal with the R sound.
那第一个特色呢，也就是我们在第92集有讲过的，不会去特别发 R 的这个音，那就跟我们的英式发音就有点类似咯。Okay, so here's an example. 我们通常如果有美式发音的话，我们都会讲 The beer was nice, right? Nice beer in this very hot weather. But if we're doing the mid-Atlantic accent, 我们那个 R 的这个音就不要把它发出来，就变成 The beer is nice.
Yeah. Instead of beer, with that strong R sound, the beer. A lot of times if you watch like 1930s movies, gangsters will tend to have this very clear R dropping accent. Like see here instead of see here.
Oh, okay. I see where they're coming from then.
Along with the R sound, another clear distinction that actually forces people to really focus on specific consonant sounds would be the T. The T gets overpronounced. Actually, this is something that I talk a lot about when I was first teaching English when I came to Taiwan a scarily 15 years ago. But, for example, you will find that the T is overpronounced in words like often. Most often, we will say often. But in the mid-Atlantic, transatlantic accent, that T is very strong. Often. I often find.
Yeah. 我觉得这个非常清楚的 T sound 其实对我们来讲，如果有很多这种语言学习者啊，我觉得是很方便的，因为通常我们会觉得到底什么时候要发音，什么时候又不用发音，会很搞不太清楚，所以现在我们就是反正把它大辣辣的很大方的就把这个 T sound 把它发出来。那我们 intern Julia 她就帮我们找了2个很好的例子，第一个是来自 Roosevelt， 我相信大家都应该知道 President Roosevelt， 那另外一个例子就来自Grace Kelly， 非常非常优雅的 Grace Kelly。那 Roosevelt 在他的一个 speech 里面，他就很清楚的讲到了2个字，第一个就是 kitten，right? Usually 我们在美式发音，我们可能会讲 kitten，right? We don't really pronounce the T sound, but he says kitten.
And within that same sentence, he actually does something that we talked about just before about dropping the R, where he's pronounced tiger, no R, tiger.
Tiger.
So we have the kitten and tiger.
Kitten and tiger. It's very interesting.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it.
那第二个例子就是来自刚刚讲 Grace Kelly， 那他也在一个 interview 里面他就讲到了，他有短短的这几个字，他讲到了 I've often asked editors, right?
This is a really interesting example because when I first came in teaching, a lot of people put emphasis on like what's a silent sound and what's not silent. And I would usually say it doesn't matter that much. And here's one of the reasons. Because when Grace Kelly, of course, movie star of what we call the silver screen, the golden era of Hollywood, this 30s and 40s, even in her own speaking, because she's gone through diction coaching and elocution classes, she still sounds like the transatlantic accent, not on screen, but in real life.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of the interview, they're talking about her, and she does this I've often asked editors. Very posh, like high level. And this is just the impression people have of her.
Right.
People can pick up the phone and get a secretary or even get me on the phone. I've often asked editors, why don't you check? Call me. I'll be happy to tell you if it's true or not true.
All right, let's talk about the next one, which is a very prominent features again. 那这个部分呢，我觉得是蛮有趣的一个特色。大家应该都读过 KK 音标的人，或者是看过音标的人，应该都对这个蝴蝶音应该不会爱啦，但是大部分人是蛮讨厌这个音，因为对我们来讲，习惯中文发音的人的话，我们这个蝴蝶音其实感觉它是比较一个 forced, because we really have to widen our mouth and flatten our mouth to make that sound. Now here, that's the good news for us. 在 Mid-Atlantic accent, 这个蝴蝶音就没有这么的夸张。
A very simple example of this would be the way that we handle the ah versus aw sound. Now, for most of you who did the KK phonics growing up, or you see that, we'll see things like ah, laugh, or pass. But what happens in the transatlantic accent and why this sounds so sophisticated is that ah sound, where you're really opening your mouth wide, becomes something we talked about before in the spelling class, where it's the sound. But it's more like laugh or pass, the ah sound. But by using ah instead of ah, you'll also notice, we talked about the oral seat a little bit, the movement of your mouth changes a lot.
Right.
But in order to sound posh and sophisticated, instead of, oh, I laughed all night, you'd say, I laughed all night.
Or you can say, instead of saying, I answer the question, right? Answer is a very American way of saying it. Answer. 就有点变得好像稍微有点英国腔的感觉。
A great example of how this works is from one of my favorite classic movie stars, Fred Astaire. If you've ever enjoyed watching musicals or tap dancing, that's probably the OG, the real tap dance movie star, Fred Astaire. But he has this great song, I Can't Dance. And he sings along with another actress, but you'll notice their two accents are different. So Fred Astaire has a slight transatlantic accent, but she has a much stronger one. So when he sings, it's I can't dance. But when she sings, I can't dance. This ah sound, I can't dance, instead of I can't dance. But it gives a separation because he is supposed to be like a more down-to-earth kind of person, and she's supposed to be very sophisticated, and they're singing about he doesn't want to fall in love with her because there's nothing that this relationship can become. But he's, I can't dance. And she's like, I can't dance.
You know what I love about saying can't instead of saying can't? 因为我发现有的时候我们在讲 can't 的时候，你听不太到那个 t sound， 所以你也不知道是你到底是能还是不能 can or cannot, right? 所以有很多时候，通常很多人就会想说，那我就用 can't 来代表。So actually, this is how I also taught my daughter as well. So when she says she cannot, she would say can't. Because it's just a lot clearer, like you know exactly what they're going to talk about.
Yeah, and you notice that T sound is really dropped in there hard.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, let's jump into our next rule of the Mid-Atlantic accent. And this is something that is interesting because I find that most English teachers in Taiwan will teach a lot of people not to do this. But it is something that happens a lot in the transatlantic accent, which is the WH sound in why, what, where, when, how becomes a hua. Why, where, who.
我觉得刚开始也是学语言的时候，也会觉得为什么这个 WH 一定就是 what 没有这个的音，它明明就有 H 在里面啊。So 其实我觉得这也非常好。You don't have to really think about 我一定要怎么样发音，我一定不能怎么样发音。Because in Mid-Atlantic accent, 你也可以讲 where, when, which, what, and why.
Not just for real-life movies, but actually in cartoons and animations, you will find this same transatlantic accent. A great example of this hua sound comes from the 1951 Disney movie, Alice in Wonderland. In fact, if you want to watch a movie that has a lot of very specific pronunciation, Alice in Wonderland does this wonderfully. But in that movie, she comes across the caterpillar. If you remember this scene, a caterpillar smoking a hookah pipe, and every time he speaks, you can see the vowel sounds. But he does this where he goes, "Who are you?" And Alice asks him, "Who are you?" And he would say, "Why should I tell you?" But that hua sound comes out very clearly.
Yeah, I still remember from that movie. The caterpillar really freaks me out. But I remember it was because he was blowing his pipe, right? 就是他在吹气，所以那个的那个发音要特别的明显，所以我觉得那个部分还蛮有趣的。I think they really use that because he's actually blowing smoke, so he needs to have that h sound.
Yeah, but he is very concerned with correct pronunciation. So it's a great example of how this very specific accent comes out.
Who are you?
I hardly know, sir. I've changed so many times since this morning, you see.
I do not see.
来到我们最后一个特色，也就是那个 oo sound。我们通常呢，在比较美式发音的时候，我们因为比较轻松一点的话，我们会可能就会变成的音。但是呢，比如说讲到 good, good, instead of saying good, or afternoon, instead of saying afternoon.
So you end up with a much more rounded ooh sound rather than saying something like good, which is good. Like good afternoon. Just saying it forces you
it is.
into that pronunciation. And again, this is why it's an interesting practice over your basic phonics is by pronouncing this like, "Oh, good afternoon, ma'am." Good afternoon. That ooh really like, again, it's a very chesty, almost like you're sighing like, good.
I can imagine back in the days if people had to make a speech, you have to really enunciate the ooh sound so that sound, a word, it's very clear to a lot of people. So we're going to give you guys an example. I'm going to try to pronounce it as American or as relaxed as we can. So basically, the sentence itself, you may find that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's okay. We're using this as an example. All right, so the original sentence is, "Good afternoon. Today I want to talk to you about the kitten and the tiger." Why, you ask? Because we often talk about it on Tuesday to our editors. So that's a very American way.
Yeah,
right?
That's the very straightforward, like, if you ever heard an American pronounce it, this is how it'd come across. But with the mid-Atlantic accent, and keep in mind, we're not experts, but we do think this is an interesting way to practice. Good afternoon. Today, I want to talk to you about the kitten and the tiger. Why, you ask? Because we often talk about it on Tuesdays with our editors.
Good job. Should I try?
Go for it.
Okay. 我有点紧张. All right, let's do this. Good afternoon. Today I want to talk to you about the kitten and the tiger. Why, you ask? Because we often talked about it on Tuesday to our editors. The editors is hard.
The editors.
Editors.
That D and the T separation, because again, we would often in just American English say editor.
Yeah.
Editor, 2 D sounds. It's a little easier, but editor. It comes across like a little more posh, but
Pretentious.
Pretentious is a good word. This is a bit of a tongue twister, and we're not meaning it like you must have a transatlantic accent, but it is a great example of how it forces you to change your breathing pattern, your oral seat, your mouth structure, in order to say it. And this will push you away from perhaps a more Mandarin-based accent to this very classy English accent. And really, probably your normal speaking voice is going to be somewhere in between here, but it's good to feel that push.
And I really think it helps everyone to slow down their speaking pace. 我觉得大家因为透过这个 Mid-Atlantic accent 你会比较注重每一个字的发音，你会发现你讲话的速度会比较慢一点点，但是你会更清楚。那这个更清楚的同时呢，当你在做 presentation 演讲的时候，我觉得可以更能够传递你的讯息，而且加上我们现在常常用视讯在开会，那透过这个电脑麦克风，其实我觉得用这种方式可以让你听起来真的更有说服力。但是当然了，有很多细节跟一些到底要怎么样来练习这个发音呢？ Nick 会在我们的 Premium Class 里面会更仔细的来教大家。
We hope that you enjoyed our deeper look into the Mid-Atlantic or Transatlantic accent. As Sherry said, for more examples of how this works, including a few video examples showing how people use this both in modern day and classic examples, be sure to check out the premium class coming out this month. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.